Rule 615. Fighting note. A punch or an attempted punch thrown by any player in the direction of an opponent, regardless as to whether contact is made, is considered fighting. A major plus, a game misconduct penalty shall be assessed to any player who engages in fighting. An additional minor penalty shall be assessed to any player who starts or instigates fighting. A minor penalty shall be assessed to any player who drops their stick and/or removes their gloves during an altercation and is not a participant in the original altercation. A game misconduct penalty shall be added if, in the judgment of the referee, such player is deemed to be the instigator of a subsequent altercation. A minor, double minor, or major plus game misconduct penalty, at the discretion of the referee, shall be assessed to any player who, having been struck, continues the altercation by retaliating. A player who does not retaliate after being struck shall not be assessed a penalty for fighting under this rule. Note: the referee is provided very wide latitude in the penalties that they may impose under the rules, including Rule 601, abuse of officials and other misconduct, in an effort to discourage fighting. This is done intentionally to enable the referee to differentiate between the obvious degrees of responsibility of the participants, either for starting the fighting or persisting in continuing the fighting. B. A major plus game misconduct penalty shall be assessed to any player involved in fighting off the playing surface before, during, or after the game. C. A match penalty, for all age classifications, shall be assessed to any player who deliberately removes their helmet/face mask prior to an altercation. A match penalty, for all age classifications, shall be assessed to any player who deliberately removes their opponent's helmet/face mask prior to or during an altercation. A game misconduct penalty, for all age classifications, shall be assessed to any player whose actions during an altercation causes the removal of an opponent's helmet and face mask. The player or goalkeeper shall be suspended for the team's next 2 scheduled games. This 2-game suspension is in addition to any other required suspensions incurred during the same incident. A game misconduct penalty, for all age classifications, shall be assessed to any player who doesn't wear their helmet face mask as designed, and the helmet face mask is removed during an altercation. D. A game misconduct penalty shall be assessed to any player or goalkeeper who is the first to intervene in an altercation then in progress. This penalty is in addition to any other penalty incurred in the same incident. E. A minor penalty shall be assessed to any player who fails to move immediately and directly to their player's bench or goal crease for a goalkeeper when instructed to do so by the referee during an altercation. F. Any player who receives a second major penalty for fighting with the same team during the same season shall receive a 3-game suspension. For a third fighting major with the same team in the same season, the player shall be suspended until a hearing is conducted by the proper authorities under Rule 410 Supplementary Discipline.
Situation A. What guidelines should a referee follow in deciding to assess a major plus a game misconduct penalty for roughing versus fighting? The referee has a variety of penalties to call to differentiate various degrees of participation in an altercation. Rules reference 615A and 640A. However, a major plus a game misconduct penalty for roughing can only be assessed for recklessly endangering an opponent by body checking. When a player has clearly thrown a punch or engages in an action that would be deemed to be fighting, the proper penalties must be assessed under the fighting rule. The referee should not attempt to manipulate the rule book, as there are progressive suspension rules for specific infractions that are tracked and enforced. Regardless of the referee's personal opinion about the rule, they are expected to apply the rule within their spirit and intent. Failure to do so in the compromised integrity can compromise the integrity of the game and lose credibility for the officials. Situation 2. A player becomes involved in several altercations during the stoppage of play. Can they be assessed more than one game misconduct penalty? Yes. Rule reference 615. Provided the player has violated different sections of the rule that calls for the assessment of a game misconduct penalty, multiple game misconducts should be assessed. The player would also be subject to supplementary discipline based on the game report filed by the officials. Situation 3. The linesman is trying to stop a fight between 2 players, but before they can break it up, one player bites the other on the finger. Should the referee assess both the match penalty, attempt to injure, and a major plus game misconduct for fighting to the offending player? Yes. Rule 615A and 602A. Both serious infractions must be assessed. A general rule during an altercation is only assessed the more severe infraction, but this applies when the lesser infractions are minor in nature, holding. However, if every instance where a serious injury potential actions are committed, the appropriate penalties must be assessed for each. Situation 4. A player becomes involved in a fight and is subsequently assessed a major and a game misconduct penalty for their involvement. They leave the ice surface and proceed to the dressing room. Later in the same game, another fight occurs, and the player who had previously been ejected returns to the ice surface to enter into the fight. What penalty should be assessed to that player for re entering the game? A game misconduct or match penalty shall be assessed depending on the circumstances. Rule reference 615A and B, 601D.4 and E.2. Had such play resumed prior to the player re-entering the ice surface, a match penalty shall be assessed. Conversely, if a play has not resumed and the player re-enters the ice surface after being escorted off the ice and the door being closed behind them, an additional game misconduct penalty shall be assessed. Situation 5. May a fighting penalty be called on a player who, with their gloves on, punches an opponent? Yes. Rule reference 615. Note: fighting may be called even though the gloves are still on the player's hand. Situation 6. Two players on the same team become involved in a fight with each other during a game. What penalties, if any, shall be assessed? If the fighting occurs on the ice, both players shall be assessed a game misconduct penalty, and the offending team shall be assessed a bench minor penalty for delaying the game. If the fighting occurs off the ice, both players shall be assessed a game misconduct penalty. Rule reference 615A and B and 610H. It is not feasible to assess the two players each a major and a game misconduct penalty because the team would have to play shorthanded by two players for 5 minutes. Likewise, a first to intervene penalty must not apply to a player on the same team who attempts to break up the fight. Situation 7. During the course of an altercation, a player involved elbows the opposing combatant. Should the referee assess the minor penalty for elbowing in addition to a major and a game misconduct for fighting? No. Rule reference 615A. If during the course of a fight one player held or elbowed the other, a penalty for holding or elbowing should not be added to the penalty for fighting. However, should the holding or elbowing be the infraction that participated the fight, one offense leading to the other, then offenses must be penalized. Situation 8. What penalty or penalties are imposed upon a coach who becomes involved in a fight with a player on the ice? A match penalty. Rule reference 615A and 602A. Situation 9. During a stoppage of play, two players look at each other and decide to fight. Prior to engaging in the fight, both players remove their helmets and start throwing punches. What penalties are assessed? A match penalty removing their helmet plus a major plus misconduct for fighting to each player. Rule reference 615A and C. A match penalty must be assessed to any player who deliberately removes their or their opponent's helmet prior to or during an altercation. Naturally, the linesman should also make every effort to separate the players prior to the start of an altercation in order to avoid a dangerous situation. Situation 10. A goalkeeper leaves the vicinity of their goal crease and is the first player to intervene in an altercation. What penalty must be assessed? A minor penalty for leaving the crease, plus a game misconduct for being the first person to intervene in an altercation, plus any other penalty they may receive. Rule reference 615A, D, and E. Situation 11. Do the on ice officials have responsibility to intervene in an altercation that occurs off the playing surface? Unless the altercation occurs on or near the playing surface, including the players and penalties benches, the on ice officials do not have a responsibility to intervene. Rule reference 615B. When an altercation occurs in the walkway that leads to the dressing room or in a similar area, the officials must observe the incident from the ice, if possible, but are not to intervene. Intervention by the officials in an off-ice environment provides too much of an opportunity for the officials to become involved with the spectators, coaches, etc. Situation 12. Opposing players are involved in an altercation and their helmets come off during the altercation. It cannot be determined how the players' helmets came off. Does this constitute a rule violation? Yes. Rule reference 615C. All players are responsible for properly wearing their helmet and face mask at all times. If a player participates in an altercation without their helmet properly worn, then they should be assessed a game misconduct penalty along with any other penalty they may have incurred as a result of the altercation. Situation 13. Two players are involved in an altercation, and during the altercation, one player reaches over and deliberately removes the helmet face mask of the opponent. What penalty is addressed? A match penalty for all age classifications. Rule reference 615C. A match penalty must be assessed to any player who deliberately removes their own or their opponent's helmet prior to or during an altercation. The linesman should be prepared to step in and separate the players as soon as any helmet face mask has been removed in order to protect the player from serious injury. Situation 14. During play, opposing players are physically engaged and their actions escalate to be considered an altercation. When play is stopped, both players remove their own helmets with the clear intention of fighting. What penalties, if any, should be assessed? Match penalty each player. Rule reference 615C. Once it has been determined that an altercation, see glossary, has occurred, any time a player involved in that altercation deliberately removes their own helmet, a match penalty must be assessed to the player in addition to any other penalties being assessed as a result of that altercation. Fighting penalties do not have to be assessed when applying Rule 615C. In all instances where a helmet has been removed, the linesman should work quickly to separate players and minimize the continuation of the altercation. Situation 15. During an altercation, player B deliberately targets the head or head area of an opposing player who is properly wearing their helmet. As a direct result of the action, player A, the opposing player's helmet comes off. What penalties are assessed to either player? A match penalty is assessed to player A, rule reference 615C. The helmet being removed during the altercation is the result of a deliberate action by player A. In this instance, the opposing player is wearing their helmet and chin strap in the proper manner, and the only way the helmet is removed is a direct result of action of player A. The player whose helmet comes off should not be penalized under this rule since their helmet was being properly worn and the helmet coming off was not a result of their action. Situation 16. Opposing players are involved in an altercation. Player's A helmet chin strap is not properly fastened, and their helmet comes off of their head during the normal course of an altercation. The referee determines that the helmet was not removed as a direct result of any deliberate action committed by the opposing player. What penalties, if any, should be assessed? A game misconduct penalty to player A. Rule reference 615C. All players are responsible for properly wearing their helmet and face masks at all times. If the player participates in an altercation without their helmet properly being worn, then they should be assessed a grave misconduct penalty along with any other penalties they may have incurred as a result of the altercation. Situation 17. Opposing players are involved in an altercation. Player B removes their own helmet and proceeds to continue the altercation. Players A helmet chin strap is not properly fastened and their helmet comes off their head during the normal course of an altercation. The referee determined that player A's helmet was not removed as a direct result of any deliberate action committed by the opposing player. What penalty, if any, should be assessed? A match penalty plus a game misconduct penalty is assessed to player B and game misconduct to player A. Rule reference 615C. The match penalty is assessed to player B for deliberate removing their own helmet. They also receive a game misconduct penalty, which carries a 2-game suspension for their actions, which caused the player's helmet to be removed. The game misconduct penalty, 1 game suspension, is assessed to player A because they were not properly wearing their helmet and it came off during an altercation. Both penalties are assessed in addition to any other penalties incurred during the altercation. Situation 18. Player A gets involved in an altercation and removes their own helmet. They then deliberately remove their opponent's helmet. What penalties should be assessed? 2 match penalties are assessed to player A, rule reference 615C. In this instance, 1 match penalty is assessed for removing their own helmet, and a second match penalty is assessed for removing the opponent's helmet. For the purpose of this rule, these actions are considered 2 separate actions, that is, each called for match penalty to be assessed. Note, if more than 1 match penalty is assessed to the same player or coach, the hearing period of 30 days, as noted in Rule 405C, remains at 30 days and is not extended beyond that period of time, regardless of the number of match penalties assessed. Note 2. The referee is provided some latitude in the penalties that they may impose under Rule 615C. This is done intentionally to enable them to differentiate between obvious degrees of responsibility of the participants for either deliberately removing their own helmet or opponent's helmet and or improper wearing of their helmets. In either instance, USA Hockey strongly discourages fighting, and the safety of the players must be the first priority in enforcing these rules to prevent serious injury. The onus is on the player to properly wear all protective equipment in the manner it was intended and not to commit any actions that compromise the safety of their opponents. Situation 19. What guidelines should be used when determining if a chin strap is properly worn? If the space between the player's lower jaw and the chin strap allows for more than one finger to be inserted into the space, then the chin strap is not being worn properly. Rule reference 615C and 304C. Situation 20. Player A, youth, is assessed a major penalty plus a game misconduct for fighting. Rule 615A. They were also assessed a match penalty for removing their helmet during the altercation. Rule 615C. Should player A also be assessed a misconduct under Rule 403B, major penalty or two majors in a game? No, match penalty should be used to satisfy Rule 403B. Major penalties, two majors in a game, Rule reference 403B, 405A, and 615C. Note, applying to situation 14 through 20, all officials should remember that an altercation does not need to be considered a fight for Rule 615 to be applied. This rule would apply to any altercations where at least one player receives a penalty. See altercation in USA Hockey Rulebook Glossary. Further, with proper execution of judgment and excellent hustle to separate players after the whistle, these types of situations can be prevented by the officials. That being stated, all players are responsible for their actions and will be held accountable for wearing all mandatory equipment properly and avoid altercations before, during, and after the game. Situation 21. What constitutes an altercation? Any physical interaction between two or more opposing players where at least one penalty assessed. Rule references 615C, D, and E, and the glossary. The referee has a wide latitude in determining penalties to be assessed during an altercation. If the referee has deemed the physical interaction has escalated to a point where penalties are assessed, those rules that pertain to behavior during an altercation must kick in, and those penalties must be assessed appropriately. Situation 22. Can there be more than one first to intervene during the same altercation? Yes. Only in the instance in which players of opposing teams enter the altercation at exactly the same time. Rule reference 615D. The player misconduct penalty shall only apply to the first player to intervene in an altercation, then in progression. Situation 23. What would happen to a player who is the first to intervene in any altercation, which is separate from the original altercation, then in progress? A game misconduct penalty shall be assessed. Rule reference 615D. The game misconduct penalty shall be applied to only the first player to intervene in an altercation. Thus, if there are two separate altercations occurring during the same stoppage and a different player is the first to intervene in any altercation, they shall both be penalized under this rule. Situation 24. A player is the first to enter an altercation, acting only as a peacemaker. Shall they be subject to the rule that governs the first to intervene? Yes. Rule reference 615D. Regardless of the reason, the first player to enter any altercation shall be assessed a game misconduct penalty. Situation 25. During the course of an altercation, a third player enters the altercation and continues fighting with the opposing player. Should the referee assess the game misconduct for being the first to intervene in an altercation or the major and game misconduct penalty for fighting? Both the major game misconduct for fighting and the game misconduct for first to intervene shall be assessed. Rule reference 615D and A. The first to intervene penalty is assessed in addition to any other penalties assessed during an altercation. Situation 26. An altercation occurs in the vicinity of the goal crease, and the keeper leaves the crease to remain out of the altercation. Should they be assessed a penalty for leaving the crease during an altercation? No. Rule reference 615E. The referee should direct the goalkeeper to go to their player's bench or at least away from the altercation. However, if the referee does not give their permission and the goalkeeper gets involved in the altercation outside of the crease, the minor penalty must be assessed. Situation 27. If a fight occurs in the immediate vicinity of a goal crease, should the goalkeeper be allowed to keep their own player's bench? Yes. Rule reference 615E. In this instance, the referee should immediately instruct the goalkeeper to leave the crease area, and their player's bench would be a good alternative. If the altercation is occurring in an area other than the immediate vicinity of the crease, the goalkeeper would be expected to remain in the crease. Situation 28. When an altercation occurs in the immediate vicinity of the player's bench, where should the referee direct the on ice non participants? To the respective goal areas. Reference 615E. The purpose of this rule is to get both teams separated from each other by a substantial distance. This practice eliminates subsequent altercations from breaking out.